It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday edition of the show. It's already midweek, August 2nd. Here we go. August off to a roaring start. Today's episode is brought to you by Koch Ag Services. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca. There you can learn more about the high cost of low-rate stabilizers. There's a lot of imposter products on the market when it comes to stabilizers. Tom Barrie from Koch Ag Services will be on today's program to talk about that, but that is defendyourn.ca. We're also going to hear today from Jacob Shapiro. He's going to talk about China, and Jacob's with Cognitive Investments. And we're going to hear a little bit of what's going on from an economic, from a social standpoint. A lot happening in China. It's hard to sort of get through all the noise. A lot of people will tell you the data and the info coming out of China is not reliable. So you got to talk to sources on the ground. And Jacob is one of the top to do that. We're also going to hear today from Joyce Parslow. She's with Canada Beef. Now, Canada Beef has launched this new product, this new service, really trying to assist all Canadians on how to incorporate beef into their meals. Well, that seems kind of strange. What are you talking about? Well, there is a lot of people in Canada from like a vast array of ethnic backgrounds. And so it's not all just about, hey, here's how you cook the 8-ounce tenderloin. There are a lot of different cultures in Canada from a food perspective, and beef wants to be involved in that. They want to be a part of that party. And so they've launched a new program, and Joyce is going to talk about it. My understanding is it really assists with recipes and how you can incorporate beef. So looking forward to hearing from Joyce on that, because it's important. That's one of Canada Beef's main objectives there, is to have that connection to the consumer. And this is how we do it. This is marketing our product to Canadians and abroad. We're also going to have time today for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have any feedback, we love to hear from you as always. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Make sure you follow us on all the different social media platforms. We are Real Agriculture. Or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. I did want to mention the RealAg podcast. So we have numerous podcast feeds. We've got one for this show, for RealAg Radio, and I appreciate all of you that are subscribed to that. But we also have what I call the fire hose feed. And what this is if you search Real Agriculture's podcasts, you're going to find a feed that has all of the content we're producing. So that's like the schools, that's other interviews that don't appear on this show. Maybe the full interviews that don't, we play a piece of the interview on this show. We don't have the full, and that's on that feed. There is agronomists is on there. It's really the can't miss feed. It's for the true fan of Real Agriculture. So if you search Real Agriculture's podcast, you're going to find that fire hose feed, and it is great. You're going to be up to date on everything. So check it out wherever you get your podcast. Hey, now, last night, I had a chance to be the MC for a banquet. It was for the 2023 Junior Canadian Little League Championships. And they've been in Lethbridge for a number of years. And there's a host team from Lethbridge, and there's the Team Alberta's from Calgary. Cape Breton is Team Atlantic. Mirabel, Quebec is Team Quebec. So there was actually a team from Vancouver for Team British Columbia. So kids that are 14 years old come to the Canadian Championships, and I got a chance to MC last night, so that was really fun. And enjoy doing that kind of stuff. And it was kind of neat though, because I sat beside the guest speaker for supper, and the guest speaker was Chris Cook from Nanton, Alberta. And this is like the second event I've done with Chris in like a month. And of course, Chris, great speaker, truly an inspiring story. Being born with no arms and no legs. And the things that dude can do is just like, it blows me away. So it was great to catch up with him and get a chance to visit and talk about sport. He loves sports. Like, I love sports. Dude loves sports. So really, really a fun night. And hopefully Lethbridge hopefully the home team does good. They lost their first game. But yeah, baseball big time in the city here this week with the championship on, and it's all happening down at Spitz Stadium, and it's always a good tournament. I always enjoy it, and the winner goes on to Taylor, Michigan. And my oldest son they won the Canadian championships here in Lethbridge, and they went to Taylor. That was really cool. Yeah, we went to a Tigers game, went to a Lions exhibition game, if I remember correctly, and yeah, a lot of fun. And it's amazing how just the look of those kids, and they all, right now they're all looking at the beginning of the tournament. They're all looking like, hey, I got a chance. And hey, they're asking all these questions. Hey, what is it like to go to the World Series and things like that? So, it was a really, really great night, and spend the night with Chris Cook, who did a fabulous job. Got a standing ovation from the crowd. Yes. Well deserved. Amazing story of dealing with real adversity and being all about your attitude. Is it being a big part of it? He actually gave recommendations to the kids, and the parent actually spoke to the parents and said, if you want to do more for your kids, do less. So that was pretty interesting piece of insight there from Chris Cook. Hey, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to hear from Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you by Koch Ag Services.
When it comes to the productivity and efficiency of your operation, every decision counts. One of those decisions is how you fuel your equipment. You need to be sure that it will run efficiently and without unnecessary downtime. Count on Co-op and your local Co-op fuel team to keep your equipment running smoothly with seasonally blended high-quality fuels and premium lubricants with guaranteed performance. We are Western Canadian. We are fueling harvest. We are Co-op.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, fava beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
This year might bankrupt us. If I lose the farm, I'm letting down generations of my family. Why am I the only one who can't handle it? Maybe the farm would be better off without me. Hello?
Hey, I was just thinking about you and thought I'd say hi. I know it's been a hard season, and I wanted to see how you're holding up.
We might feel alone, but we're all in this together. Visit domore.ag for mental health supports tailored for the agriculture community.
Today's episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Koch Ag Services. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca and don't fall into the trap of using imposter products. Defendyourn.ca. We're going to hear from Tom Barrie from Koch here in a little bit. Once a month I get a chance to talk to Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments. There's lots to discuss. I mean, we recorded this on Tuesday afternoon. The full interview is going to be up at RealAgriculture.com. Encourage you. We spent a lot of time talking about Russia and Ukraine and relating that to all the other things that are happening in that area and around that topic. Will the U.S. get involved? Where does Canada sit? Where does China sit in this conflict? Because this seems to be a bit of a real changing situation on a daily basis. But we also talked specifically about China. And I want to play that audio for you here right now. This is Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments. Let's move on to China. A lot of news coming out of China. And what I keep on hearing on the grain side of the equation is a lot of concern about demand. And that's relevant to the status of the Chinese economy. What are you seeing out of China? Is some of this overblown, or is there real reasons to be concerned about the status of economic development there?
That depends how you look at it. I'm not overly concerned about demand for agricultural commodities. China's going to consume whether the economy is doing well or not. The questions about consumption are relating to China's manufacturing excess. They've been used to exporting abroad for so long. They have excess capacity internally. They need Chinese citizens to buy all these electric vehicles that they're making, to live in these ghost cities that they're building in the middle of nowhere that have nobody living in them. Because if you keep on getting all of that unprofitable investment, eventually that will come back to bite you. The problem here is that China still is not willing, and this is very ironic, they're not willing to really support consumption. So the Chinese State Council, after alluding to their plan for months, finally released a big list of their plans to try and boost the economy. But it doesn't actually boost household incomes. It doesn't actually put more money in the pockets of Chinese citizens to go spend. It says, oh, we're going to have tax breaks on buying EVs, and we'll have more cultural and sports events so that you spend more money. And there's tax breaks on this, and you can purchase real estate where you couldn't purchase real estate before. They're incentivizing consumption, but you can't incentivize consumption with a consumer who feels like he or she does not have enough money and is not willing to go to the cultural sporting event and buy all the things. So until we get to the point where the Chinese Communist Party is actually willing to be communist and say, hey, all these wealthy fat cats on the coast, we are taking your wealth, or all of you provincial bureaucrats who have been siphoning off wealth from the system, we are taking your wealth, we are putting it in the pockets of the Chinese, peasants who are living on $2 and $3 a day. Until they're actually willing to live up to the Communist Party's name and redistributive economic policies, I think we're stuck in the situation where China's economy, this export-oriented, export more, build more, consume more, runs up against the ground of it's not productive. It's taking more and more debt and more consumption to equal the levels of growth because it's not productive and it's not sustainable. So that, I think, is the difficult position that the Chinese government has it in. But if you're a farmer right now, I don't think that actually affects things that much. That demand is inelastic. The Chinese people still have to eat, even if growth figures are not doing well. You've still got the Chinese economy humming fairly from a relative and historical perspective. So it's more of an issue for tech companies or manufactured goods or all those other sorts of things. I think for ag commodities, it's more about weather. It's more about food security and sovereignty issues and the improvement in U.S.-China relations, all of which, at least in the short term, are good.
Any signal from the foreign minister being removed? And he's also missing, right?
Well, we haven't seen him in a month. I was recording my own podcast with Matt Pine. I'll credit him with this. He said, there are probably two people in the world that know what happened with a foreign minister, and one of them probably won't be talking for very much longer. But look, we don't really know. He was handpicked by Xi Jinping. He was handpicked by him 6 months ago to be in this position. There are rumors that maybe he had an affair with a TV presenter. There are rumors that he was corrupt and he was under disciplinary violation investigation. All the other sorts of things. That's all sort of rampant speculation. I will say, besides the fact that he was a Xi Jinping favorite and Xi has had to pivot away very quickly, he was more of a wolf warrior. He was a little more aggressive. He wanted to push against the West. And Wang Yi, they're bringing back the predecessor. That's a stable hand. And I think you are seeing that China wants relations with the United States, with the West, to be a little bit better in the short term. And maybe that's some of the signal that we've got there. But there's no denying that this is weird. There's no denying that this is sort of a blow to Xi Jinping's credibility. And it's really one of the real first signs that we've seen of any even potential kind of opposition or fears from Xi Jinping about his place that he had to do this.
What does better relations between China and the U.S. look like? Like, because everybody comments on the ebb and the flow of that, things aren't very good or things are improving. What does that actually mean?
There are a couple different levels to that. The first is, the most basic level is, are the two sides talking to each other? Can Antony Blinken pick up a phone call and get to Wang Yi, and can they have a conversation to, say, deconflict a situation in the South China Sea? Are they actually picking up the phones? They weren't picking up the phones around COVID. That's one of the reasons COVID became a pandemic, because the United States and China, for political reasons, couldn't talk to each other. Nobody trusted each other and was willing to know what was going on. If you want to go a step further, the United States was preparing this huge change in strategic relations towards China, and they were going to curb investment in China, make it very difficult for U.S. investors to even buy Chinese stocks and things like that. Well, we already know the White House has been leaking. That's going to be very, very watered down, in part because of pressure from a lot of U.S. tech companies who were afraid of what the United States government was talking about. So in tangible terms, we basically went from the United States declaring economic war on China to, hey, okay, we're going to announce some of these smaller restrictions on investment, but it's mostly business as usual. So that's another way where things are improving, where you're not seeing both sides completely go to that sort of second or third level of the trade war. And then maximally, and we're nowhere near this yet, but if Biden wanted to go back to what he was suggesting, well, I should say what his White House was leaking last summer, they were talking about taking down some of the Trump era tariffs for a year or two on a provisional basis to lower inflation, because supply side inflation is also one of the reasons I think inflation is stickier there. So if you got some kind of, it wouldn't be permanent, but if you could say, hey, for 1 year, let's call a truce, ceasefire, let's just open it up and try and get, freer trade going again. Like that maximally is some of the ways that it could look. So there's a big spectrum there. And, Antony Blinken and Wang Yi talking probably means nothing to this audience. Actual steps by the United States to lower the temperature and to say, okay, the restrictions that we intimated at a couple months ago are not going to be as severe as possible. That matters. That shows you that both the United States and China are not spoiling for a fight right this second.
Yeah, the talk about those tariffs being removed, it's kind of floated away. You don't hear a lot about it recently. It's interesting. I read the new book by former USTR Robert Lighthizer, where obviously those tariffs were a big part of the conversation in that book. And I think he has said since that they should be doubled again, in his opinion. Did you read that book?
I didn't, but that reminds me of the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The United States raised the trade war and they had this quote unquote phase 1 trade deal, you probably remember, and it was going to result in the Chinese importing massive amounts of U.S. agricultural products and everything else. They didn't meet their quotas. Like none of the tariffs actually did anything. Go back to so in response to some of the measures the Biden administration was announcing earlier this year, China announced a couple of weeks ago they were going to ban gallium and germanium exports. Those are important metals in semiconductor manufacturing. They have a big strategic holdover. The Trump administration raised tariffs on gallium and germanium in 2018. We still have the same level of dependence on China as we did in 2018. It didn't actually do anything. So tariffs are, square peg round hole. It's one big tool that probably doesn't do the thing you're actually trying to do. It's why the Biden White House has actually been a lot tougher on China than the Trump administration, because they are really surgically targeting the areas where China's most vulnerable. They're trying to make it hurt. Whereas, the previous administration just said, okay, tariffs, then everything is going to set itself off. Tariffs are really just a tax on the consumer. The person who ends up paying in the end for the tariffs is the consumer, who, because of inflation or who, because of less supply or more expensive goods, like that's where that ultimately goes to.
Did I read right that Italy is pulling out of the Belt Road Initiative?
They are. I actually arrived in Italy the day that they announced that they were entering. I was speaking at a conference in Genoa, and it was the talk of the whole weekend that Italy was willing to do this. But yes, Meloni has announced that she's taking Italy out. It was very, very controversial inside of Italy in foreign policy circles about whether to do that. This is also the place where I make the tongue-in-cheek joke where who cares about Belt and Road Initiative? I hope the state of Louisiana joins the Belt and Road Initiative tomorrow, and that the Chinese build new port infrastructure down here in New Orleans. We desperately need it. And I'm happy for us to default on all of our debt and not pay the Chinese back a yuan or a cent for any of the things that they build here. I'm not that threatened by sort of Belt and Road infrastructure, but I understand that as a political signal, it wasn't the best move for Italy, which wants to be a strong NATO ally, which wants to be a strong partner of the United States, to enter in this thing that the United States has been so worried about. So yes, Italy's leaving the Belt and Road. So what? It's not that big of a deal. I mean, Japan has spent more on infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia than China has via the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative just gets a lot of hype because China wants to hype it up as their civilizational plan to connect the new Silk Road, and because we all need reasons to boogeyman China into being, the evil actor in the world.
Do you worry about Japan at all? With the aging population and some of those kinds of issues there. Now that you mentioned Japan.
Well, there are different degrees of worry. All countries have their problems, but in general, no, I'm not particularly concerned by Japan. The demographics thing, I mean, we can spend some time on demographics if you want. I am inherently skeptical of people who make arguments just based on demographics. I mean, this is one of the things that Peter Zeihan, who is a former colleague of mine and is a more well-known geopolitical strategist than I am. He often likes to talk about demographics. But I find that demographics are very, very hard to predict, and that demographics in general are not destiny. If anything, Japan is ahead of the pack on its demographics nosediving, and that means they're probably going to invest more in automation and artificial intelligence than everybody else is, because they have to do it first. I'd also note that Japan, the percentage of the foreign-born population is increasing in Japan. It actually increased 11% year over year. That's remarkable. That's a remarkable cultural change in Japan. It's a very homogenous society, and yet you are seeing that they are trying to make it easier for immigrants and migrants to come in, and they're even trying to integrate them into Japanese society. And like I said, also, they are building infrastructure and all these different things in Southeast Asia, moving some of their factories out of China, also building supply chains in China so that they can continue selling into the Chinese market while not running afoul of the United States and others. So I don't think that just by virtue of aging that you should count out Japan in any meaningful sense. I worry about Japan from the perspective of they are next to a country, China, which is much bigger and has a lot more potential power than Japan does in the long term. And they have historically not been very friendly. So if I was Japan, I would be pretty concerned about that. But that's why Japan has been such an ironclad U.S. ally, why they're patching up relations with South Korea, why they're investing in their own military and things like that. So the last thing I just say, I work as a partner at an investment firm. We've been long Japan since before Warren Buffett was long Japan. We've been very optimistic about Japan for years now, and happy to have other folks that are on our corner. But it's because I think you're getting some of these cultural changes in Japanese companies. You're getting this real stepwise change to respond to a more volatile world, because if Japan doesn't respond, it could be caught flat-footed and be in a very weak position.
So based on what you said there between Japan and China, is there any, and there's always a chance, but does that mean that Japan gets really not excited about China joining the CPTPP then? Because that was kind of the push, the reason that was pushed so much by the US and Japan at the time was kind of a counter to China economically. So and China showed, I can't remember the exact technical term, but they have showed some interest in joining that trade pact. So what happens there?
They won't join that trade pact. Japan was much more upset that the United States pulled out of that trade pact than they were that China might want to join it. That trade pact was not just a trade pact. It came with all sorts of rules that you had to implement about intellectual property and labor standards and things like that. If China actually made the reforms that were necessary to join the CPTPP, it would become a more liberal country, which is not what China has done. Everybody's been hoping that China would do that as a result of its economic success, and it really hasn't. So I think that's more about Japan thought that it had this agreement with the United States that they were going to build this, broader economic order that was going to be aligned not just on trade, but all those other things I just talked about. And the United States decided to turn its back on it. So that I think was more concerning for Japan. And if China wanted to join the CP, more power to, that would mean real change in China that I don't think China is willing to make.
That was Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments. If you want to hear the full interview that Jacob and I had, you can go to RealAgriculture.com. You can also find it on the Real Agriculture podcast feed. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Tom Barrie of Koch Ag Services right after this.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Ag Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube RealAgriculture.com or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time to talk to today's show sponsor, Koch Ag Services. And right now we're joined by the Director of Sales for Canada. It is Tom Barrie, based out of Saskatchewan. Hey, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Okay, I've been reading the promo for defendyourend.ca. I enjoy doing it. We have some fun with it, but it's an important topic. So let's talk about what is the high cost of some low rate stabilizers?
Well, not all nitrogen stabilizers have the same or even comparable rates of active ingredients in them. There's a lot of different products in the market that claim that they have above and below ground protection, meaning control volatilization, denitrification, and leaching. But the truth is, you need pretty good levels of active ingredient rates, and a lot of the products in the market don't have anywhere near enough.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit here. Why is it important to have the right rates when we're talking about this?
Well, we're working on the soil, and so there's two key drivers in the soil. And the first one, the first pathway when we use urea-based fertilizers, Shaun, is the urease enzyme. And the urease enzyme is present in all soil. And it's actually an interesting enzyme because it persists in the soil. Enzymes aren't living, they're just molecules, but it is very, very hard to break down. And that's what's responsible for turning urea-based nitrogen into actual nitrogen. The plant can use ammonium and then further on nitrate. And you need to have high rates in order to inhibit that enzyme from rapidly converting your urea. Same is true for the nitrification portion of the nitrogen conversion in the soil is you have the nitrous monas bacteria. So when you're dealing with bacteria, rates are very important because, as we know, the amount of bacteria in soil, anaerobic and aerobic bacteria in the soil, some would say is around 7,000 to 9,000 kilograms per acre. So rates is very important when we're trying to inhibit these reactions.
Well, and when we're dealing with something that's happening in the soil, I think it could be challenging for farmers to they're not seeing a weed being killed, right, or a grasshopper dying, but and so there's that. There's not the visual aspect, but it also allows for the opportunity for, well, I'll say it sort of not as good products, imposter products coming onto the market and saying, yeah, it's working, but there's no visual aspect for verification, right? So this is a real challenge, and for farmers to kind of sort out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's the market that we live in every day. So this our campaign with defendyourend.ca. There's a lot of information there on what the nitrogen cycle is and the differences between products in the market. And we really hope people check it out to see if they are using a stabilizer, if they're using a stabilizer that's got the right amount of active ingredient to, work.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hit on that. How do some of the products from Koch Ag Services measure up in terms of some of these active rates?
Well, we've got a few different products. We kind of classify our products into three different categories. The first one are urease enzyme inhibitors, and those are our lead products of Anvil and our Agritane products. And then our second group is our dual inhibitors. Those contain a urease enzyme inhibitor, also a nitrification inhibitor. And so those in urea are Super U, which we make at our plant in Brand in Manitoba, Koch Fertilizer Canada, and then as well at Koch Fertilizer Enid, Oklahoma. And then as well we have a product for UAN called Tribune. And so it's made up of Agritane and our brand new nitrification inhibitor called Centuro. And then our third grouping is our nitrification inhibitors only, and that's for anhydrous ammonia and for UAN if you just wanted to have nitrification inhibition, and that's called Centuro. And so our products in particular, if you compare Super U on the market, Super U has, over 9,000 parts per million of active ingredient. That's broken apart between, over 8,500 parts per million of dicyandiamide or DCD, and then over 600 parts per million of NBPT, which is Agritane. That's the molecule that is behind the Agritane product line. And so those rates, when we compare that to the market, there's a lot of products on the market right now that don't even have 1,500 parts per million of combined, and that would be on the high side, Shaun, actually, of the products in the market that claim that they're just like Super U. The highest products barely have 1,500 parts per million of total. So,
wow, that's a significant difference for sure. Hey, Tom, what's the website again? defendyourn.ca, right?
Yeah.
Also, they could talk to their local retailer?
Yeah, talk to your local retailer, but there's a Find a Rep tab on the there's a Find a Rep tab on the defendyourn.ca website, and you'll be able to get in touch with all of our representatives across Canada.
Hey, great stuff. Hey, Tom, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
That is Tom Barrie. He's the Director of Sales with Koch Ag Services, and also today's show sponsor. So big shout out to Koch Ag Services for supporting Real Ag Radio and Real Agriculture. We'll be right back on Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio, brought to you today by Koch Ag Services. Let's dig into some pretty tasty recipes with Canada Beef. We're joined right now by Joyce Parslow. She's Executive Director of Consumer Marketing with Canada Beef, based out in Mississauga, Ontario. Joyce, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much for having us, Shaun.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. So, okay, let's start off first. Let's talk about the Canadian Beef Information Gateway, or as many call it, the Gateway for short. What is the Gateway?
It's basically an online sort of ecosystem of all things beef. It's designed to give helpful information as well as inspiration to cook with Canadian beef. And it's very unique in that it approaches beef from the cuts that are available. And so if you're shopping and you are looking at a cut of beef that you're not familiar with, the Gateway is a perfect place to start to learn all about it. We include how to cook information, as well as recipes and videos that match those recipes for over 70 cuts of beef. So it's extensive, it's a real deep dive in everything you want to know about Canadian beef.
Yeah, now there tends to be a lot of education when it comes to, okay, you bought an 8-ounce tenderloin, how do you get it to medium, or how can you prepare it, how do you cook it? But there's a lot of different ways to consume beef, and we have a lot of different cultures in Canada looking to consume beef. So talk about some of the new features here as we look at world cuisine.
Okay, world cuisine. This is a really exciting module that's been added to the Gateway. It's a collection of recipes that help represent how Canadians are cooking today. And it includes like a broad range of cultural influences. So there's 10 cuisines that we ended up working with to be represented here at the Gateway. So this is a sampling. It's not the definitive, of course, of what cuisines are available in Canada. We base it on some Stats Canada data about the population of Canada and its makeup, and as well as sort of what restaurants and recipes are popular these days with Canadians. And so it's a way to sort of build your own adventure. We have the 10 cuisines represented, like a Thai, Middle Eastern cuisine. We had never featured Jewish recipes before in our Canadian beef recipe collection, so this was a great opportunity to do that. We have Chinese, we have Caribbean represented, and even recognizing the importance of our Indigenous communities. We have an Indigenous chef who made contribution to this collection. And each set of recipes, there's 4 recipes per cuisine, so 40 recipes in total. Each recipe also has a how-to video, and this is really helpful for people who are, visual learners. And it takes a lot of copy sometimes to read through to understand a new technique of how to cook beef. So you can get it in a snapshot by watching the videos.
Very cool. It really speaks to the multicultural background of Canada. That there is you just think about the GTA, and I know you live right beside it, so you know this full well, but, there is a ton of different cultures, and it's a really cool way to give, maybe somebody isn't interested or isn't typically including beef or doesn't know how to include beef in that Jamaican recipe. And this is really, really a great way to expand the consumption of beef in Canada.
Well, and I know younger people especially seem to have an interest in, they eat out a lot. So it's helpful to maybe know how to make some of their favorite cuisines that they've sampled at restaurants, perhaps.
Yeah.
At home. Or for maybe some second generation Canadians to get in touch with some of their homegrown recipes that maybe they've lost access to or weren't handed down, so they will understand how to make them. These are very authentic recipes, so they will look a bit complex, but that speaks to their authenticity, and we give tips about where to get ingredients, and like I said, these videos are really helpful for that.
Yeah, very, very neat. And in those recipe collections, there also is a kid pleasure section. Talk about that.
Yeah, our next platform, the recipe collection section, is representing a way to categorize the over 300 recipes on the Gateway into buckets that help you with meal planning. So you can pick recipes that either fit your time schedule or fit your family size or just fit what you're interested in cooking. So when you're talking about kid pleasers, there's recipes there that are sort of, some of them are snackable items. Some of them, they were just designed with kids in mind. So they're a bit more playful perhaps, or smaller servings, or they play into the idea of kid favorite foods like, I know, cheeseburger. We have a cheeseburger meatloaf, for example, that type of thing. So it's taking kid favorite flavors and maybe transferring it to other types of beef dishes. We do want to ensure that people get out of their tenderloin sort of headset and explore all the different types of beef cuts that Canadian beef has to offer. So that's why we call this a bit of an inspirational tool as well as an informational tool. It helps you take advantage of maybe cuts that are on sale, for example, that you might not be familiar with, and how to cook those. We break things down by sandwiches and wraps, for example, as another category. Tailgate and picnics are pretty popular in the summer season, so we have a feature on those. That's just some of the sampling of the types of categories we have for our recipe collection section.
And the other module is diet and wellness. And of course, beef is a very, I know this, I talk about it all the time. Beef is a very much a part of a nutritious diet. Now there is groups that do spread some, I guess, misinformation about beef. Talk about this module and how it really appeals to the crowd that's a little bit more focused on diet and wellness.
Well, what we wanted to do was help people figure out what recipes and how beef belongs in their recipe pick if they do have a diet concern or a particular interest in a diet. It actually calls out recipes that have things that enable a certain diet need, like diabetic friendly, for example. And it also would have recipes that maybe exclude some foods that maybe you're trying to avoid. So there is an allergen collection. And again, this is quite unique to anything Canada Beef has ever done before. So we used work with registered dietitians to help sort through our recipe database to make these categories. So there's things like heart-friendly, diabetes-friendly, allergens, gluten-free, dairy-free, for example. Those, and I know we're working on a bone health section right now as well. So it's to address concerns, not necessarily restrictions, but it does include guidance to help you avoid things that if you've got those stroked off your list, how to do that with the recipe collections that we have here.
Okay, and once again, Joyce, bring it back. How do people access the Gateway?
That's another unique property of the Gateway, is that we've worked with retailers and have two major retail partners. We have Freshco and Real Canadian Superstores. These are groups that have distribution across Canada of Canadian beef, and on pack of their beef, Canadian beef, they will have a sticker that has a QR code that people can scan. People got very used to scanning during the pandemic, and it's building on that learning that people had, that they can now scan the package at store or scan it when they get home, so they'll be able to understand how to cook those cuts of beef. And we have over 100 independent retailers across the country as well participating in this. You can also get to the Information Gateway by a handy URL, gateway.cdnbeef.ca. So I'll just repeat it again so you can write it down, gateway.cdnbeef.ca.
It's pretty amazing to have this kind of wealth of information for consumers to access when we're talking about 70 beef cuts. That is a substantial. We're using up a lot of the animal when we're talking about 70 different cuts.
There were cuts even I hadn't dealt with before. Things like bubble meat, for example. So these are of cultural significance to a lot of people. But we had talked about those cuts when we were speaking with our international markets, but not necessarily for Canadians here at home. So that's an interesting one that, again, is a good way to get people inspired to think outside of tenderloin, for example. There's oxtail, there's all the specialty cuts like tongue and heart, for example, as well as all the traditional favorites, and even some of the newer steak cuts like flat iron, for example, or top sirloin cat. So it's all things beef in one helpful little program.
Great stuff. We've been talking to Joyce Parslow. She's Executive Director, Consumer Marketing with Canada Beef. Joyce, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Well, that's been fun. I really appreciate you giving us time to talk to you about it. Thank you.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we'll get to the top ag news stories of the day. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you by Koch Ag Services.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
It's now time for the top ag news stories of the day here on RealAg Radio, which is brought to you today by Koch Ag Services. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca. Well, right off the top, not really an ag story, but definitely a Canadian political story. Big announcement that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie have split. They've decided to separate, according to statements posted online by both parties. Quote from the Prime Minister saying, Sophie and I would like to share the fact that after many meaningful and difficult conversations, we both have made the decision to separate. Trudeau is 51 and Sophie is 48. They were married in May of 2005 and have 3 children together, 2 sons, Xavier and Hadrian, and 1 daughter, Ella Grace. And that's kind of big political news here today. According to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, Trudeau and Gregoire Trudeau have signed a legal separation agreement. So we are not just we're moving ahead with this. This is not something that is sort of a. We'll see how it goes. It sounds like they are done. In other news, south of the border in the U.S., we have the new Purdue CME Group Ag Economy Barometer showing American producers are more concerned about interest rates than they are about crop prices. So according to the Ag Barometer, which is based on a survey of 400 producers across the U.S., rising interest rates were chosen as the number one concern by nearly 1/4 of respondents. That topped the 19% of respondents who selected lower output prices as their top concern. Meanwhile, farmers' primary concern for their farming operations in the upcoming year was still higher input costs, chosen by 37% of respondents in the July survey. Nearly 2/3, 65% of producers in July said they expect interest rates to increase, up from 57% who felt that way in June. Among those producers who said now is a bad time to make large investments, the top reason cited for this being bad time was concern about rising rates. We have seen in our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index the same concerns about why now is not a good time to invest in capital. Overall, agricultural producer sentiment improved slightly in July as the Ag Barometer rose 2 points above its June reading to an index value of 123. This month's 2-point rise in the barometer was primarily the result of farmers' improved perception of current conditions on their farms. The July Ag Barometer survey was conducted from July 10th through the 14th of last month. And of course, we will have the July results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index out next week. So we will contrast and compare on how American farmers feel against Canadian farmers in that Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. Members of the World Trade Organization have reached an agreement on most of the outstanding issues concerning dispute settlement reform, as reported by Marco Molina, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Guatemala to the WTO. These findings came about through an ongoing informal process aiming to develop a reform proposal for consideration at the 13th Ministerial Conference of the WTO next year. This has been a big issue with the WTO. This progress occurred under Molina's guidance, who led the consensus building process to reinstate WTO's 2-tier dispute settlement process by 2024. This process was initially agreed upon during the organization's 12th ministerial conference in 2022. Since the current dispute resolution body, the appellant body, has been non-operational following the U.S.'s objections to it. Because of this situation, some dispute rulings remain unaddressed, and any resulting trade sanctions cannot be implemented. Reactions to Molina's presentation were mixed, according to some reporting on the agreement. We'll see how that moves forward and what some of the impacts are on Canadian trade in the coming weeks and months. Russia appears to be open to returning to the Black Sea grain deal, according to U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield. However, she emphasized the U.S. has yet to observe any factual evidence affirming this. She re-emphasized that for provisions enhancing Russian grain and fertilizer exports to be implemented, Russia needs to rejoin the deal. Also, during a phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Turkish President Erdogan reiterated the importance of the Black Sea grain deal and expressed his intentions to continue his efforts to reestablish it. Erdogan stressed the need to avoid actions that could increase tensions amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, defining the Black Sea Initiative as a bridge of peace, so to speak. And now I can tell you, in my conversations with Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments, now you heard us earlier in the show talking about China, but when we talked about Russia and Ukraine, he pointed out he believes that Russia will come back to the deal as well. So there's a little bit more momentum to this maybe than we first thought. Amazon is really jumping into healthcare. A story in the Wall Street Journal, that they're expanding their Amazon Clinic virtual service to all 50 states and Washington, D.C. as a part of its efforts to grow in the healthcare industry. The Seattle-based company launched the service in November to connect patients seeking treatment for common conditions like acne, sinus infections, and pink eye with healthcare professionals on a virtual messaging platform. In a blog update on Tuesday, Amazon said the service will also support video consultations. Now, to me, this is a big deal, okay? One, this is why we need to have rural broadband so that basically people in rural communities can access telemedicine. That's one point. But two, we've got a lot of concern about not being able to access family doctors in rural areas. This is a huge issue in Canada. I know it likely is very much in the United States as well. So this is a real help, I think. This is actually maybe even a bigger deal in rural communities to have access to something like Amazon Health. We'll have to follow that and see if that actually does come to fruition. And maybe, hey, if you are using Amazon Health and you have been a part of some of these consults virtually, let us know. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Be very interested in knowing how that has gone. The government of Ontario is launching a new round of the Meat Processors Capacity Improvement Initiative with support of the federal government's Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. That's the SCAP program, or SCAP as some call it. I think if we're going to call it SCAP, it should have a hyphen. Just saying. The $10 million program will provide funding to eligible freestanding meat plants and abattoirs to make short-term investments in their meat handling and processing equipment, technologies, and practices that improve efficiency, productivity, and food safety. There are approximately 480 provincially licensed and 239 federally licensed abattoirs and freestanding meat plants in Ontario. Now, okay, this is from CNBC, and there's a comparison to the ag industry. Same problems. Okay, the construction industry in the U.S. is facing an extreme labor shortage. Roughly 650,000 workers, slowing completion of construction projects from residential homes to the infrastructure of hospitals. The shortage of construction workers has many causes. You ready? The pandemic, shifts in American cultural values, and workforce demographics. The solution, according to experts, is a balance between immigration policy, greater use of technology, and efforts to raise the profile of construction as a career path. Hello, that's exactly the issues the ag industry is going through, and those are exactly the solutions, right? Those are exactly the solutions. This is why the temporary foreign worker program is important, and a path to citizenship for those people that are participating. How do we attract people that want to work in the industry of agriculture to immigrate to Canada? How do we make sure that we balance that with some of the technologies like robotics and autonomy and artificial intelligence? And how do we make sure that we're ensuring that kids that are in school in Canada understand that agriculture it's a lot of different types of jobs. It's not just growing crops. It's not just raising livestock, which are important components of this industry. But there is a plethora of jobs in this industry, and we are definitely fighting. We are definitely fighting the issue of trying to not convince kids to go to trade schools and do handsy jobs because everybody had to go to university, and now we have this massive shortage of people doing practical sort of jobs, plumbers and carpenters, construction, and things like farming. It's one of those unintended consequences of what was sort of a big part of the messaging from adults and universities and governments, quite frankly. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across social media on all of the different platforms, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Big thanks to today's show sponsor, Koch Ag Services. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers.